Hi everyone, this is Mike Fitz, a fellow with Explore.org and the Bear Cams in 2018. In just a moment, I'm going to be hosting a live play-by-play style broadcast where I will narrate the salmon and bear activity at Brooks Falls, so please stand by. Hi, this is Mike Fitz with Explore.org and the Bear Cams in 2018. Just a moment, I'm going to be starting a live play-by-play style broadcast where I narrate the salmon and bear activity that you see at Brooks Falls. So please stand by. Hi everyone, this is Mike Fitz, a fellow with Explore.org, and I will be narrating the bear and salmon activity at Brooks Falls over the next hour. This is a play-by-play style broadcast, and I'm doing this remotely. I'm not at Brooks River right now. I'm actually at my home base, so I'm watching the webcam feed along with everyone else. And it's a bit of an experiment to see how well our technology allows this. And I'm not also driving the cams either, so I have a very helpful camera operator who has agreed to drive the cams and pan around today as we take a look at the bear and salmon activity at Brooks Falls. So there will be periods of time maybe where I'm a little bit quiet, where I'm looking at the camera feed, trying to decide what the bears are doing, and maybe communicating as well with that camera operator to give you the best views of the activity at Brooks Falls. So it's July 20th, 2018, as you know, and the bear activity is still pretty thick at Brooks Falls. So in Alaska, it's just about 2 p.m. Local time, and there are several brown bears fishing at the waterfall right now. If you're used to seeing a lot of the other ranger broadcasts or broadcasts that I've done with Explore.org over the past several weeks, you may know that many of them will try to answer questions from viewers about the bear and salmon activity. And during this broadcast, I won't be monitoring the chat on Explore.org. So hopefully, in the meantime, I'll be able to answer a lot of the basic questions that you might have about the activity that we're seeing along the river. And it looks like there's definitely plenty of salmon in the water today. Many fish jumping at the waterfall, not extremely high densities like we've seen in the past, so salmon do end up moving into the river in waves. So sometimes there will be more, sometimes there will be less. On top of the waterfall right now is a big adult female, and this is number 409 Beadnose. She's very skilled at fishing the lip. It looks like we have number 775 Lefty, who happens to be in the middle of the waterfall near the log, and then several adult males in the far pool, and I think we'll eventually get the pan to each one of those. Then walking sort of in front of the cam also looks like an adult female. On 409 Beadnose, the bear on the top of the lip, she is probably one of the larger females that we have here at Brooks River. Again, very skilled at fishing the lip, loves that spot, doesn't tend to necessarily move to different spots on top of the waterfall. That's really where she wants to sit, or stand, excuse me. So if another bear is occupying that spot, she'll sometimes try to shove her way into that exact location, or she'll just wait her turn. There are a couple of places to her left or to her right where she could stand and potentially catch fish, but that's not really where she's learned to do it. It doesn't seem like she's comfortable to do it from that spot. So she's very fixated on trying to catch fish in that one location. And again, the bear that's down below her in the falls, right at the log, is number 775 Lefty. If we get a better look at him later on in the broadcast, you'll see that he has a short left ear, so it's very easy to recognize him. He's the only bear on the river right now that has a short left ear. Sometimes bears are missing ears or they have damaged ears, and their ear shape can really help us over the course of seasons and years to identify them repeatedly. So he's a very distinctive bear, partly because of that short left ear and also his very active fishing style, and he might demonstrate that for us later this afternoon. But right now he's sitting and looking quite content in that spot right next to the log. .775 is a bear that we had seen at Brooks River for a number of years, but really only in the fall, and really only after the lodge closes on September 18th. There are a lot of bears that just aren't tolerant to the presence of people, and many of them will come later in the fall to use the river a bit more freely without having to worry about competing for people with people for space. But then a few years ago he showed up in July and clearly did not know how to fish the waterfall. He was running around trying to steal fish from every bear. He actually jumped off of the waterfall a few times in some pretty amazing leaps to try to get salmon. And I think his behavior at that time really demonstrated just how hungry he was. And he still kind of shows a little bit of that behavior. Very active fishing style in many instances. Standing on top of the lip too, very animated with his head movements, like he's excited or frustrated trying to catch salmon. And this is a spot that I haven't seen him fish all that often. Usually he's on the lip of the waterfall. But every once in a while I kind of wonder whether or not bears just need a little bit of extra enrichment. They have things that work for them, of course. But with 775, being a successful bear fishing the lip of the waterfall, maybe he just wants to try something different. And the salmon run this year has been very good for these bears. Over 2 million fish have escaped up into this watershed, the Naknek River watershed, which Brooks River is a part of. And Brooks River receives about 20% of those salmon that move into the larger Naknek River watershed. So, on average, we can expect 2 million fish moving into Naknek River, then about 400,000 moving through Brooks River. So this is a very good year to be a bear at Brooks Falls because there's a lot of food to go around. And just behind him, a couple of other adult males. The one that's sort of standing closest to the waterfall, kind of at top center right now. A little hard for me to see who he might be in our current view. There's several adult males that will fish that far pool. And they will stand in some fairly shallow water there. That one right in the center of the screen, the water in front of him is not very deep at all. So he can wait for fish to swim in front of him. He'll have a very clear view of them. And the fish have a hard time swimming in that spot because it's a shallow location where they can't really get a lot of force through the water flapping their tails. So they're flapping their tails against a lot of air, which isn't very helpful for them. So bears can take advantage of that very easily in that location. And when I'm identifying bears on the webcams, when I'm not at Brooks River and I'm not watching bears in person, and I see them at home, like many of you are doing, a lot of times I try to pay attention to the whole of the bear. Silhouettes become very important to me when I'm watching the bears online and trying to differentiate between each one. This one is, fairly dark bear. He's not a particularly large adult male, but he has very wide set ears. If he turns his head towards us, I think we'll be able to see that just a little bit easier. So I think this is bear number 801, and he was a bear that was first identified officially last year. However, there's some pictures of him from a couple of years ago at Brooks Falls. So he's been around before, but the bear monitors weren't necessarily able to quite match him up with any known bear. So he received his new number last year, and he's not necessarily particularly dominant either. Adult males are they rank near the top of the hierarchy just because they're very, very large. But within that subcategory of bears, adult males, they all have sort of different ranks, and only very few of them will reach the top of the hierarchy. This bear here, he's not quite large enough to compete for the best fishing spots or access to females consistently with the largest of adult males, so he's often displaced from more preferred fishing spots by some of those very, very large bears. And I also have the ability to toggle to some different views. So I'm going to toggle to the falls low camera right now, and maybe our falls high cam can swing to a different view here in just a second. But there's a few young bears that are standing downstream of the waterfall in that falls low view. Very typical for bears that either don't know how to fish the waterfall, aren't very good at it, or aren't necessarily comfortable getting very, very close to the larger adult males up at Brooks Falls. So we'll see this from time to time. Younger bears kind of walking in front of this camera, walking in the water, downstream of the falls, looking for scraps. And since there is so much food in the water right now, as far as leftover salmon, younger bears can easily make a living just by looking for those leftovers. We just caught a glimpse of a 409 bead nose up on top of the lip catching a fish. There was another adult male. Looked like that might be moving into the jacuzzi area. No, sorry, mistaken about that. That's another, looks like a young adult, two young adults there. Perhaps the one in the foreground, number 39, fairly blonde mane right now. The other one behind it, maybe we'll zoom in and get a closer look at this. This looks like that other one might be number 151 Walker. So he's an adult male in approaching his early teens right now. Not particularly assertive, I would say. He also remains a little playful at this time of the year, and he might be looking just for some leftovers in the water too. Both of those bears parted ways. There may have been some growling in that instance. And you can see right now 39 opening her mouth. Because 151 was right behind her. Growling, yawning. If you see, and you might be able to hear it occasionally on the falls cam, if you hear any jaw popping, it's a very distinctive noise. And I wish I could recreate it for you. It's a teeth clacking that the bears make, and sometimes you can see them doing that by they're just opening their jaws maybe once a second or so in a very repeated pattern. Those are all signs of stress and ways that bears are communicating their stress to one another. They're intimidating the other bears. .151 has moved to the base of the waterfall, looking for maybe some scraps. And we're looking at a younger bear right now doing the same thing. on the edge. And these younger bears, these subadult bears that are between 2.5 and 5.5 years old, they really are wary of their surroundings almost at all times. These younger bears, they can be very playful with one another, but they tend to keep their distance from the older bears because those older bears are a very real physical threat to them. And again, bears are smart; they know when to pick their battles. So if it looks like the situation is just a little bit too dangerous for these younger bears to approach, they'll definitely turn tail and move in the other direction. And you often will see these younger bears, especially when they're near the waterfall, constantly looking around back and forth, swinging their head, not only looking for food, but also, again, looking for those competitors that might come up from behind them or from the side. Younger bears like this are especially difficult to tell apart. So if you're wondering, well, I don't recognize any of these younger bears, I can't tell them apart, you're kind of in the same boat that I am as well. So especially at this time of the year, they're shedding, they're growing so much. These younger bears, as a proportion of their body weight, will gain probably more fat than a lot of the adult bears. So they'll be quite pudgy at the end of the year. Some of these younger bears can even double their body weight. If you weigh 150 pounds at the beginning of summer, if you have a really good year, then you may be able to get up to 300 pounds or so in a year where there's a lot of good fish. So it can be very difficult to recognize these bears from season to season. Some of them are a bit more distinctive than others, like the one that just ran through the frame right now. That was number 717. So that one, very sort of grizzled blonde in color, toasted marshmallow, I think is maybe a good way to describe that, and that's something that I've picked up from the park's wildlife biologist, Leslie Scora, will describe some of the bears as having a toasted marshmallow color. And that was number 717, moving away from the island from a bear that was cruising in the area. And the bear it was moving from is probably the one just on the left side of the screen. And that one's walking towards the waterfall. And this isn't a particularly large bear either. This is also looks like perhaps to be an older subadult, and not 100% sure, but this could be 719. She's a young female right now, older subadult bear, so not quite an adult. Again, scavenging scraps in the river. Certainly, scavenging is an effective way to make a living. And again, up on top of the waterfall, number 409, in that log, or near that log in the middle of the fall, 775, still sitting there, and then a couple of three large bears over in the far pool. The one on the far side in his office, very distinctive the way he sits, floppy right ear, and relatively blonde for an adult male, and that's number 480 Otis. The one that's not quite that's eating a rock or a fish near the far side, kind of in front of those rocks, perhaps number 747. And he is certainly, I think, the largest bear that we've seen at Brooks River this year. The fattest. Maybe not the most dominant, but certainly the fattest. And it looks like, again, on that far side, number 480 Otis, in the far pool, kind of right in front of him, standing in the water, kind of closest to that rock, number 83. He has a very distinctive scar on his hind end, and that one is actually courtesy of the bear that's sitting behind him. A couple of years ago, it seemed like number 83, he was an adult male in his mid-teens. He was standing near that spot, actually, and he wasn't really paying too much attention to what was happening behind him. and 747 came up and clawed him and gave him a fairly large wound in that location, or reopened a wound that had been there. So 83, again, standing near the rock, still sports that scar. And 747, one of the more skilled anglers at the waterfall, one of the fattest bears I think I've ever seen, sitting downstream of him. And then it looks like number 151 has moved over to that side as well. So he's just kind of sitting downstream, maybe hoping for some scraps from 747. The interactions between these bears at this time of the year are fewer than they were at the beginning of July. In a sense, there's more fishing spots at this time of the year, because the bears have become more tolerant of one another as they've become more familiar with one another over the past several weeks. When bears first arrive at the waterfall, they're often very protective of themselves, of their fishing spots. They're looking to establish or reaffirm their dominance over the other bears in the area. So they're more willing to challenge one another at that time of the year. And at this time of the year, again, we're approaching late July. These bears have probably encountered one another virtually every day for the past several weeks, so they no longer need to hash out these physical interactions with one another each and every time. So you'll see almost like more tolerance as the summer progresses. Now we're getting a decent look at number 83 there. You can really see that scar right at the top of his hips there. And then again, that bear on the far side, standing in the water there, now taking a little bit of a drink, is number 480 Otis. That's a spot that we've nicknamed his office, because that's where he goes more often than not to make a living. He'll fish in different locations, but he definitely is very good at fishing in that spot, especially in the fall. So during autumn, there might be some fresher fish moving through the river, and it's easy for him to find those in that far pool. Excuse me. $83 with the fish right now. Salmon are these animals' the most important food source. The majority of their calories each year will come from salmon, particularly in this watershed, sockeye salmon. And again, 83 standing in right in a spot where the salmon are going to be are going to be vulnerable. You can see that the water there is not very deep, but it's also very swift. So as they try to push through that area, 83 will be able to see them very, very easily. And one just kind of floated right in front of his face, and he sort of ignored it. And that indicates to me that he's had, again, a lot of meals today. When this is another behavioral difference that we can see in the bears right now versus the beginning of the month. When a lot of bears were first arriving, they were ravenous. They hadn't eaten anything, any good meals really for months. Maybe some of them not since the previous fall before they went into hibernation. So their hunger is extremely profound in this when the salmon first arrive, and they'll expend more energy trying to catch fish at the beginning of July than they will right now. So they're more willing to take their time, be more selective at this time of the year, and that was probably perhaps what 83 was doing right there. And we're going to pull back here for just a moment, get a slightly wider view. We have 409 back on the lip of the waterfall. And again, 775 still sitting in the log. And let's see here. On the far side over there, still a little bit of interaction going on. We'll cut back to that. So number 83 there. It looks like he's getting a little uncomfortable with the presence of 747, who's to his right. So 83 with that scar on his hip. 747 also likes to fish that location, and 747 is a really big bear. 83 does not tend to challenge him. So in that spot, 747 can kind of move in and force him out of the way if he so chooses. You see 83 sitting down right now. That's a bit of a submissive pose. 747 standing up, sort of facing away, not paying too much attention to 83, so that's a more dominant position by that bear. A little bit of a yawn there from 83, so maybe he's a bit more uncomfortable. And the close proximity of these two bears that we're seeing right now is, again, probably something that we would not have seen at the beginning of the month. But tolerance increases even though 747 wants that fishing spot. You can see that he's not actively trying to chase 83 out of the way or push him out of the way. 83 just kind of looked at a fish right there, but wasn't going to try to make any real sudden movements. I think in the with 747 standing so close, so he didn't really lunge for that fish at all. And again, these are some of the largest brown bears in the world. The Katmai National Park only has brown bears. There are no black bears in Katmai, no polar bears. We're not quite far enough north for polar bears. Katmai is about 300 miles southwest of Anchorage, Alaska. That's about where Brooks River is. And I neglected to introduce that at the beginning of the broadcast. So this is Katmai National Park in Alaska. And again, I'm about halfway through this play-by-play for this afternoon, and my name is Mike Fitz. I am a fellow with Explore.org and the Bear Cams, and we're very grateful for all of the work that Explore.org does to be able to bring this to the world, and very grateful for the partnership with Katmai National Park, so everyone can share this experience. Now 747 really turning, directly challenging 83. You can see the head positions there. 747 with his head both heads were of those bears were down. 747's was a little bit higher though. His ears remained forward, and now he just turned away, and that basically is a big almost like turning up your nose and looking away from a person. Basically, it's communicating to the other bear that I do not perceive you to be a threat, and I'm going to continue to do what I'm doing. And 83 is just kind of going to stand there and take it. So he's not reciprocating the challenge in any way, not really trying to usurp 747's position in this situation. So maybe 83 will kind of move away in just a few minutes, but right now he tends to be holding his ground, maybe because he wants to try to fish there. But certainly 747 is showing more signs of dominance. And the bear in the background there, head down, very focused in the water. That is, again, number 480. And I'm going to transition here to our Falls Low cam for just a little bit, because it looks like we have a yearling cub on there. And they just kind of moved out of our frame. But we've had one bear family moving in and out of the Brooks Falls area over the past couple of days or so. And there are many bear families in the area right now. We'll see if they come back in the picture here in just a moment. But that looked like one of the yearling cubs of 451. She has 3 yearlings, and those are cubs that are in their second year. Yearling cubs are generally lighter in color than sprig cubs or cubs of the year. They're often very lanky in appearance at this time of the year, very shed out. So looks like they kind of moved out of the way. We just caught a glimpse of one of them, maybe as 151 was walking back into the waterfall area. You can see him on the left side of the screen there, number 409, right on top of the waterfall. Bears will often, look right into the water below the lip of the falls where another bear had been eating. Looks like that was what 151 was doing there. And okay, there we are. Now we have a better view of 451 and her cubs. So they're walking downstream in the island there. "451 is an experienced mother. This is not her first litter. But she's a bear that has persevered through, from a human perspective, a bit of tragedy, and also through injury too. When she was really first identified, she had a very severe limp a few years ago. So that was something that was noticeable each and every time that she walked through the lower river area. And that was off of her right rear leg, if I remember correctly. And now there's a bear actually kind of walking between, looks like 451. Looks like another adult female with kind of big ears and a long muzzle. And then you can see the 3 yearling cubs kind of standing on the bank. They were alerted and alarmed by the presence of the other bear moving through. Now 451 kind of quickly coming over in their direction. But 451, again, doesn't really seem to show any signs of that leg injury that she had several years ago. And that was a persistent limp that she had. We noticed it through a couple of seasons, so it wasn't necessarily something that was quick to heal. Whatever the injury was, we don't know if it was a broken bone, a sprain, something else. We just don't know. We do know that, however, that she did have a limp for a couple of years, but was able to persevere through that. She attempted to raise 1 litter, and 1 cub from her previous litter died on camera in the fall of 2015. But now she's back this year with 3 apparently healthy yearling cubs. And you're looking downstream from the waterfalls right now. Those people that you see in the view are probably about, well, not quite a quarter mile away, but getting close to there, about a quarter mile from Brooks Falls. And back to our falls low cam here. Again, the two adult bears standing or sitting in the water, sort of in the foreground. 151 Walker sitting right at the base of the waterfall, number 39, sort of with a blonde mane. Downstream of him, number 409 on the lip of the waterfall, number 775 near that log. And 2 young subadult bears just walked in front of the camera. There's been a pair of younger bears that look very much alike and are probably siblings, and I think that's might have been who it was. Sibling bears will not often, but sometimes stay together after they're separated from their mother, especially in their first summer. And here comes one of them right now. You can imagine sort of the shock of being separated from your mother after she has been your protector, your provider, your teacher for a few years, then all of a sudden you're cast out on your own. So these younger bears, and there's the other one of the pair, these younger bears will sometimes stay together, I think, for protection, because two bears are safer than one. There's more eyes, there's two noses to smell for threats as well. But also, I think it might provide each other with a little bit of comfort too, because sometimes cubs do form, fairly strong bonds. They can dissipate fairly rapidly too once separation happens. But those are a couple of hypotheses about why younger bears might stay together after they're emancipated. Each one of these bears, again, kind of looking for scraps of fish as they drift downstream. 151 on the downstream end right now of number 39, standing upstream. That upper left corner there, 747 has moved from the far pool towards the jacuzzi. Almost every movement of him at this time of the year is slow and deliberate. So he's moving into the jacuzzi right now, very easy for him to catch fish. He's a very healthy bear. And again, here come those two subadult bears looking to try to catch some fish up at Brooks Falls. And while bears have the skill or the tools as far as big claws and teeth to capture prey like salmon, they do have to practice quite often before they can get good at it. So that's especially noticeable in young bears when they try to charge through the river. Because they're not very good at capturing fish. The older bears, more experienced bears, are much better at knowing when to run through the water after fish, knowing how to do it as well. Salmon, there's probably a bunch of salmon in the water right in front of these bears, but when you're running through the water, it can be more difficult to catch them than sitting at the waterfall and waiting for the fish to come to you, just because there's so many escape routes for the salmon, and on occasion there can be so many fish too that it can be hard for the bears to really focus on one individual, and that might be an advantage of the schooling aspect of sockeye salmon, kind of flooding into these watersheds in large numbers. Maybe makes it a little bit more difficult for any predator to focus on any one individual. You see that sort of with sardines, or herring out in the ocean. And we can see that sometimes with salmon. Again, 409 bead nose on top of the waterfall. Not 100% sure of this, but these two subadults that we've been looking at downstream of the waterfall, and again, one standing right at the bottom of the frame, could be her offspring from her most recent litter. Mother bears recognize their offspring, I'm sure, even after they're separated, and vice versa. But even though the bond between a mother and cubs is very strong when they're together, it's not something that is carried over into young adulthood for these bears. So the mothers sometimes will even charge their former offspring, maybe as a reminder just to stay away. So even though mom might be at the waterfall right now, she's not going to necessarily show any extra tolerance for them compared to any other bear. Up on that far side right now, 409 eating a fish against the log. So that must have been one that she was able to scavenge or kind of got stuck in the log there, because being on top of the waterfall there, walking away from the lip where she was, that's not a place where bears are going to be able to catch fish consistently. In fact, I've really never seen them run through the water there trying to catch fish. because salmon in that location, aren't going to be able to find spawning locations there. So usually they're going to kind of move through to some different locations where it's easier for them to rest and spawn. So that area where she is happens to be fairly scoured of any gravel or any protected places where a salmon could rest in the water. Oh, excuse me, I think this might be a different bear. I think this might be number 854, Divot, who's eating this fish on the log. So not 409. Excuse me, I mistook them from a distance. 854 Divot is an adult female that's had at least 2 litters. 3 litters, excuse me, if I remember correctly. And she has a fairly distinctive round scar all the way around her neck. Or 2 litters, yes, 2 litters with 854 now that I check the notes. And it's a little hard to tell, from this perspective, but she does have a round scar around her neck, and that was from a wire snare that she was caught in a few years ago. Thankfully, we were able to tranquilize her and remove the scar. It's very satisfying when I see her as a healthy adult female bear living the life of a wild animal. So this is, again, satisfying to see a healthy Divot instead of one that was perhaps going to be incapacitated and eventually die from that wire snare around her neck. And she happened to move down off of the log there into the far pool. And it looks like our falls view is dominated right now by a lot of adult bears. So again, in that far pool against the back wall there, 480 Otis. In the middle, number 854 Divot, kind of a medium-sized adult female, medium-large. Not the largest that we have for adult females, but definitely she's sort of dwarfed by even these medium-sized, medium-large adult males that we have here, like number 83 standing in front of her. Now, number 83 telling 854 that she got a little bit too close there. A little bit of a charge, but not very much. Not enough to make 854 leave the area. And again, this is an example of how bears are growing more tolerant of one another. At the beginning of July, late June, 854 might not have come down into this location between those 2 adult males. But now she senses that they're maybe going to allow her a little bit more freedom to do that. And 83 just easily catching that fish. You could see that fish was drifting downstream in front of his nose, was trying to swim upstream, but just couldn't really get a good purchase in the water there. Couldn't swim out of the way, and he was able to just easily grab that. And in the foreground, again by that log, number 775 Lefty, with one of his several salmon that he's caught so far this afternoon. Each one of these fish is still very energetic, high in calories. So on a good day, the bears will still be taking in tens of thousands of calories. These salmon are yet to spawn, and in fact, in Brooks River, the bears won't spawn for perhaps another month, really. So it'll be a long time before bears will be feeding on dead and dying salmon in Brooks River. We're going to start to see bears, and we probably have already started to see it. We're going to start to see bears moving away from Brooks River as salmon disperse throughout the watersheds in the area. So again, this is not the only salmon stream in Katmai National Park. In fact, there are dozens and dozens throughout the area. So as the salmon disperse throughout the watershed, they start to spawn in some very small streams, off of Lake Brooks, for instance, or off of Naknek Lake, the bears will move into those locations. This is kind of the tail end of a very specific set of circumstances that makes it worthwhile for bears to fish at Brooks Falls. Because when salmon stop migrating through Brooks River, the waterfall is no longer a bottleneck to the fish. So if fish aren't trying to move beyond Brooks Falls, then there's not going to be a lot of fish pooling in these locations where we see bears sitting and standing right now. And consequently, it's going to be a bad place to fish. So bears will move to different salmon streams coming up fairly shortly. And then bears will come back towards the end of August and early September to feed on dead and dying salmon. Most of the other salmon streams in the area are kind of like a one-and-done event. Salmon move in, they move in very quickly, they spawn fairly quickly, and the whole thing is sort of over in about 2 weeks. And that makes Brooks River different than those other locations where we have this early migration period where the salmon are available to bears. And then we have the late season spawning event that makes the salmon available to them once again. So bears at Brooks River have two opportunities to fatten on salmon. And another adult female moving into the view at the bottom of the screen. This is number 504. She has kind of a tapered muzzle and fairly large ears, and very round ears too. Often when you're looking at the shape of bears on the cameras, you're looking at their silhouette. The ear shape is one of those distinctive characteristics that you can see, and you don't need a lot of fine detail to determine the shape or relative size. So I think this is number 504, an adult female who's had one previous litter that we know of. I'm going to type a message right here to our camera operator, just as a request for review. Here's a good view of number 504. Again, fairly round ears, almost like a cartoonish shape, like a cartoon mouse. And then a fairly tapered muzzle. Not a particularly large female bear, and sometimes these females are mistaken for juvenile bears when they come to Brooks Falls, just because they look so small in comparison to the males. Male bears in Katmai at this time of the year are going to weigh 700 to 900 pounds, so they're very large animals. And females some of them are going to weigh half as much. So those big bears up at Brooks Falls really do dwarf all the other age classes and sizes. And I asked our camera operator to give us a close-up of 480 Otis here in the far pool doing his thing. He is the oldest adult male bear that we know of at Brooks River, so he's at least 22 years old. Could be a little older, we're not really sure. He was classified as an young adult bear or an older subadult when he was first seen. So again, just sort of a roundabout estimate on his age. He's again a master of efficiency, like many bears are, but particularly Otis. He will stand in this far pool, look into the water. He's very focused when he's doing this. He often looks like he's not really paying much attention to anything, but he is very focused on that few inches of water just right in front of him. And he's looking pretty fat, especially for this time of the year. And one of the reasons why I wanted to get a close-up view of him is because I want to show you a photograph that I took of him at the end of June. Let me cue that up for you so you can see 480 looking much, much thinner when he arrived not that long ago. But now, getting much heavier around his neck, especially around his belly. Excuse me. And we're seeing this from all of the bears, not only 480, but also like number 409. Again, this is a picture of her from late June. You see her in the waterfall right now looking much, much fatter. You also will see 747. If you see him out of the water right now, this is a picture of him from late June. He was fat then. He's very fat right now, almost at the point where it looks like he could go straight into hibernation and do quite fine. So the bears have had so far a really good year. The salmon run has been exceptionally strong. It could turn out to be one of the largest salmon runs on record in Bristol Bay. So again, in Southwest Alaska with the sockeye salmon. And 480, again, being very patient, kind of just lunging forward when he needs to, when he sees a fish there, able to catch a nice sockeye salmon. And now as he's eating it too, you can see that he will bite the fish in a certain way, has a little bit of trouble skinning it, and that's because of he's missing some teeth, he's missing canines, his incisors are very worn down, his molars are probably very worn down as well. So that's an ailment that he's been suffering with for a number of years. So he's not nearly as dexterous with his teeth as a lot of other bears, but is still able to make a living, compete up at Brooks Falls. So again, when we see these older bears, I think we can really marvel at their longevity and their experience. And that's a couple of the stories that I always try to follow each and every year at Brooks River. I try to follow the stories of 480 and number 410. 410 is the oldest adult female that we know of at Brooks River. And while she hasn't been around all that much this year, I do like to see how their experience is going to allow them to survive just another year amongst some pretty tough competition. Because again, you get older, but none of the there's always younger bears that are coming up, growing and getting stronger each and every year. And again, bears are selfish creatures, so it's difficult for them, for these older bears to compete with those younger, stronger bears. So they have to find different ways to do that. And so far, 480 has been very successful, as you can see, because of that big pot belly he has. Take a look back at our falls low cam. Again, there's a couple of subadults, those siblings wandering around on the fringes still. These younger bears often have to expend a bit more energy to catch fish, but they also don't need as many salmon to gain weight and stay healthy. And honestly, to tell you, when I was at Brooks River over the past month, I did not see any bears that looked particularly thin. Personally, it looked like there were so many fish in the water that the bears were really able to get most of what they needed. Back into that far pool, we have a new player, and that happens to be number 503. So he's a young bear, fairly assertive and willing to put himself into different situations. Maybe these younger bears that we're looking at right here will be sort of like the next dominant bears up at Brooks Falls. It's hard to say. The real dominant bears that we have up at the falls right now, like 747, number 856. When I watched them as younger adult bears, I was not able to really see whether anything in them that would really indicate that they would be very dominant or large bears. But we're seeing in 503, and again, looking back at the far pool, he's right in the center of the screen. There's a gull sitting on the rock, and he's right behind that bear. His ears are kind of swept back on his head a lot of times. But yeah, we're seeing indications from 503 that he's willing to put himself into different positions near a lot of other larger bears. Maybe not as willing to back down as some other bears his size. He's also very big for his age. He's only 6 years old. And he's quite big. If I didn't know his life history, when he was born, and some of those other details, I would guess he was closer to a 10-year-old bear just based on his size. So he's a very big bear for how old he is. Again, 480 minding his own business pretty much that whole entire time, even though 503 was moving through that far pool quite a bit. Another bear on the far side there. That area is a spot where a lot of bears will come down to access the waterfall, especially bears that aren't very tolerant of people. Where the webcam is standing right now, that's a wildlife viewing platform that has 40 people on it at this time of the day. So there's a lot of people on sort of like the south side of Brooks River, and a lot of other bears aren't necessarily quite tolerant of those groups of people. So those sometimes will stay to the far side or only access the river from that far side, where this one bear is lunging for fish now. Now that I'm getting a better look at this bear, it looks like this one could be, again, number 504, maybe just moving over to the far side. The bears tend to ignore a lot of the other critters near Brooks Falls, especially birds, so gulls, magpies, ravens, eagles. They usually tend to ignore them, and only really when the birds tend to be annoying the bears will the bears sort of like lunge at them. But the birds are very quick, easy for them to avoid the bears. Bears are fast compared to humans, but they're not necessarily fast compared to birds. So the birds really do only flee from the bears when they absolutely need to. And as 747 catches a fish, decides to exit the jacuzzi, and we have a younger bear kind of moving into the frame. Again, one of those smaller subadult bears that we've seen moving back and forth quite often during this afternoon's broadcast. Again, this is a time of transition here at Brooks River. I think we've talked a little bit about how the bears are showing increased tolerance for one another, which is normal for this time of the year, just because they're used to seeing each other every day. They're getting a lot of salmon meals in their belly. So that's one of the things that we can sort of watch for moving forward over the next week or so. One of those other transitions that you can expect to see is how there will be fewer and fewer bears as we progress towards the end of July. And that's partly dependent on the number of salmon. If we keep seeing a lot of salmon move through Brooks River, then that may keep the bears around longer, but bears are going to have more and more opportunities to fish for salmon in different locations. So this is a time of transition for Brooks River and Bear Cam. There's going to be a lot of exciting stuff to see throughout the rest of the year, but it is right now the end of July, so things are going to be transitioning quite quickly from our early summer ravenous bear season to maybe a midsummer season where the bears are a bit more sated. The mating season is over, and they're going to find more opportunities to fish in different locations. I'd like to thank everybody for joining me on this play-by-play broadcast this afternoon, brought to you by Explore.org and Katmai National Park. My name is Mike Fitz, and I am a fellow with Explore.org and the Bear Cams. I'll be back online to do another one of these broadcasts at 3 p.m.